Hello, you wonderful people, and welcome to another episode of Not Too Comic Book. This being a show where I talk about TV shows that are adaptations of comic books. For today's episode, I'm going to talk about the latest episode of The Flash. So in this episode, the main thing in this episode is the fact is that Wally is having dreams about being, well, Kid Flash. But everyone is concerned about it except for Wally because it's like, oh, this is proof. The fact is that I'm coming into my powers. That's what this is all representing. Everyone else is seeing as a downside. Like, you do realize, Wally, that you're getting these dreams of you having your powers and everything matches what happened to everyone else. And we specifically heard it from Magenta. It's like the moment, like, she started having dreams and then her powers developed and she turned into a villain and everything. But Wally's defense being like, but no, I was a hero in the other world. So it's like, even if that was the case, it wouldn't matter. I wouldn't turn into a bad guy. But it's like, you'd still be getting your powers from Alchemy, who's been doing all this stuff. So it's kind of like, okay, like, don't you see the correlation there? And then Barry kind of finally tells them the truth. He's like, yep, this is kind of a Flashpoint thing. It's like, why didn't you tell us? You guys literally told me you didn't want to know about Flashpoint, which is, yeah, it's, you know, you can't argue in that. He's like, I could tell you what happened in Flashpoint. She's like, they're like, nope. You know, even if it's something like Wally becoming a superhero and everything, it's like, you know, you and that Iris and him are kind of like a team duo and everything. That doesn't change the fact is you told him not to tell you. I mean, I'm sure Joe's not going to want to know the fact is that when Wally was a superhero and everything, he was not the most attentive dad, that he kind of just got drunk most of the time just because, I mean, that was his way of handling it. The question is, because there's a lot of differences in their lives and everything because of Flashpoint and everything, so it makes you wonder, because Joe has Barry there to kind of balance it out, because Barry was kind of his buffer to this, so if Wally became, you know, Kid Flash and everything, I doubt he'd have the same reaction as he did in the Flashpoint. The only difference is because, like, Barry wasn't there to kind of act as a buffer for it. It's like, at first he wasn't all for Barry being a superhero, but he saw the good that Barry could do, which you gotta, like, because I did like the fact is that Wally's like, okay, wait, what? Okay, you're getting all pissy about me becoming a hero and everything, but you don't say jack squat to Barry. It's like, oh, I guess Barry can do no wrong. It's almost kind of balanced in between Wally and Julian. It's kind of interesting that they almost have that same perspective of just like, I guess, you know, in both regards. For Julian, it's like, oh, Barry's the golden boy at the precinct, and then for Wally, it's like, oh, at home, Barry's the golden boy. So, I mean, because it kind of pointed out, like, the fact is during this whole alchemy thing later on in the episode, Julian's not around for, like, the rest of the episode. So from the very beginning, I was like, oh, it must be Julian, but it's probably one of those psych out things. Kind of similar to the whole possibly having Lance be Prometheus kind of being a thing. I mean, I don't know. To me, they seem like setups to kind of make you think that. Like, cause I've been very suspicious of Julian since the very beginning, but now I'm like, I don't know. They're pointing the finger at him now, so I'm very reluctant about it. But you know, you gotta admit, Wally has some valid points, but you also gotta see Joe's perspective on it, where it's like, Joe's like, you are exactly like me. You're very confident. You kind of jump into things a little bit. You're a bit, you know, rash. And it's kind of like, I was exactly like that when I was your age. And it's like, I know what I would do with superpowers, you know, because even in the case of Kid Flash, we saw that, you know, Wally was kind of cocky, but it didn't stop him from being a hero. I mean, granted, we didn't really get to see him full-blown hero. I mean, his cockiness is the reason why he got hurt, because he got, like, too cocky when he was fighting the rival and ended up getting hurt. I mean, because in his mind, he's looking at it, it's like, I was like, oh, Barry doesn't want more competition. I'm sure Barry would love to have help. I mean, he didn't have any complaints when Jesse ended up speeding around. But for him, it's the fact of the matter is he's remembering what happened to Wally. He blames himself for it because it's like none of that would have happened to Wally. Wally would have never been hurt. Because I think it's also a very interesting, like, if you want to break it down and everything, I think Barry looks at it like he's not the real child, but Wally is. Wally is Joe's real son. And it's like, yeah, he knows Joe cares about him, but the fact of the matter is he will never be 100% Joe's son, but Wally is. So I guess in his mind, it's like, I can't do that to Joe, the man who's been like another father to me. It's like, I can't do that to him. I got to make sure that his son doesn't get involved in any of this and doesn't end up getting hurt. Plus, like I brought up earlier, the whole Joe drinking thing. It's like he probably doesn't want that to kind of become a reality too, and kind of see Joe like that. But once again, there's a difference, because in that world, Wally was the only Flash that existed. In this one, it's like Barry exists, so he acts as a buffer. So Joe's not all that keen about it, but I'm sure eventually later on down the road he would have been okay with it. But it is kind of interesting because this is our first time actually seeing the slow process of what alchemy does. And I like that whole thing. Like, you see it like when, they have Wally kind of locked up and he's kind of going a little crazy, and you see alchemy like scratched into the window. But like the moment it turns to Iris, it disappeared, and when it came back to Wally, it disappeared. So it seems like that is only like something people tap into alchemy can see. Like he makes them see that. So that was kind of interesting thing to me. Like, I mean, because even when it was happening, it almost seemed like Iris wasn't paying any attention. So I'm like, oh, can she not see that? Can only Wally see that right now? It's like, I'm guessing so. So that was kind of interesting. But like I was saying, like, we see like the process of what it does to a person, seeing them kind of slowly become unraveled. The kind of longing to be whole. I mean, because it means so much to Wally, because Iris brings it up to Barry. It's like, the fact of the matter is, you get a little tired of sitting on the sidelines. It's like they see you zipping around, using your powers for good and everything. It's not like it's a bad thing, like you shouldn't use your powers or whatever. But the fact of the matter is, it makes them feel a little useless, because it's like, I want to do good too, but here I'm on the sidelines. I don't have power. You look at someone like, because even Iris, to put it in perspective, is like, I'm kind of not really helping out much. It's like, you have Caitlin and then you have Cisco. They're very smart. They're very sciencey. Even Cisco has power, so he can help in that regard too. But also, he's very smart and tech savvy. Him and Caitlin too. They understand the science behind this. They can help come up with solutions. It's like, I'm not in that case. I'm just kind of here to help in whatever shape or form I can. Kind of similar how Wally does the same thing. I mean, because at least in Joe's case, Joe's a police officer, so he can help in that regard too. So. Because even, it kind of gets Barry thinking, like, maybe Iris is kind of missing, like, having powers and everything, too. There was kind of a joke that, was it Superhero Roundup or whatever makes, that basically every season Barry kind of loses his powers. That's kind of a thing. I mean, because in perspective, I don't know how often that happened in the comic books, but it's, it's a storyline. I'm pretty sure that happens. I mean, because I think that happened to Clark pretty often. Like, there'd be points when he ended up losing his powers or something like that in Smallville and everything. So, I mean, it's something you make your hero kind of struggle without the powers. Just because it kind of happened as a Smallville storyline is, what if Iris ended up getting Barry's powers momentarily? I mean, that could be the case. I don't know. Like, I think that'd be kind of an interesting episode, seeing what she would do with his speed. Because a similar thing kind of happened in Smallville. That's, like I said, why I'm bringing up the comparison. There was like an episode where Lana ended up getting Clark's powers. I mean, not fully, like they ended up sharing it, like, but she kind of, like, his powers got copied onto her and everything. So it's like, but rather than copying it, it gets straight up sent to Iris. Because it's like, I don't know, because the fact is they threw that out there. I mean, obviously to kind of ground it a little bit, as to kind of like, obviously you don't have superpowers. Obviously you're going to be a little jealous and envious. The fact is that you can't do anything, and that's very realistic. I mean, I can understand that. It's like, I'd be fuming with jealousy, and maybe because that's the question as to why alchemy does what he does. Maybe alchemy is somehow alchemy is a byproduct of Flashpoint. Maybe that's what this is all about, because, like, alchemy's trying to make a point, like, Barry doesn't understand, like, what's coming. And I'm thinking, like, maybe alchemy is a byproduct of Flashpoint, that somehow alchemy existed in Flashpoint, but when he shifted the timeline over, the, like, stone which he uses, I think it's called the Philosopher's Stone, maybe it allowed him to keep his memories. That's also how he makes other people remember their Flashpoint counterparts. So maybe that's what this is all about, because for him, it's like Barry took away his life. For maybe when alchemy came here, I almost call him an alchemist, but when alchemy came here, his entire life that he knew in Flashpoint didn't exist here. Say, like, maybe he was married, had children, but because Flashpoint was an alternate timeline and he came to this timeline, they don't exist. So maybe that's what this is about. He figured out, it's like, oh, you did this to me, Flash, because the Philosopher's Stone gives him knowledge, so he understands what's happening. So maybe that's what this whole grand scheme thing is about, getting revenge. It's trying to bring everyone from Flashpoint over into this world, because he lost his world, essentially, so. But what I find even intriguing about that whole situation is the fact is that, obviously they use Wally as bait, very reluctant, but they decide to do it. So, because it's like, if it keeps up like this, if he doesn't go to alchemy, it could eventually kill him. And so they kind of stop him and everything. And but he ends up dropping the Philosopher's Stone, but the stone is kind of calling to Wally, and Wally picks it up, even though Barry and Joe want him not to, but he does, and he basically gets kind of cocooned a little bit. And then also at the same time when this is all happening, Barry is attacked by the light. We get to finally find out what that light was. I assumed it was alchemy, but they're like, the way everyone else talks, like, oh, I guess it's not alchemy. I guess it's something or someone else. And it turns out to be, I forgot, I didn't catch the name. All I caught was God of Speed. And that thing looks sick. Not only is it super duper fast, no one else but Barry can see it. So it must be like a Speed Force thing. I mean, maybe alchemy's special in that regard too. Well, I mean, it makes you wonder, can alchemy see it? Because like the fact of the matter is, like, obviously its movements happen to you. So it's like it, when it killed the rival, that could be seen on camera, but no one else can see it. I mean, what I'm curious trying to understand. I mean, it seems like people can kind of see the light, maybe. But I guess Joe was stopping because all this stuff was happening around. All those cops got like messed up bad. But just looking at him, doesn't even look human. He looks more like a machine. So maybe this season, because we got a little bit of a touch of the Speed Force last season, and maybe we'll tap into it a lot more this season and find out what the hell this thing is. Maybe that's why it went specifically after, because it's the only person it's attacked so far was the rival. So maybe it has beef with other speedsters, whatever its case may be. Like whether it was its power, like it refers to itself as a god of speed. Like I looked it up for a little bit. I saw some title stuff and Wikipedia stuff. I didn't read too much into it because I was like, you know what? I'm not about to spoil myself, but I'm very interested to find out what that's all about. And like I said, it has to be a speedster thing since Barry's the only one that could physically see it. I mean, granted, everyone can feel its punches and everything, but still. Because at first I'm looking at it, I was like, oh, the fact is Barry can run. I was like, wait, is this like a time wraith or something? Is this something like that? First, I saw the blue and everything. I was like, oh, is this actually Zoom? Is Zoom back? Did alchemy bring Zoom? It's like, nope, that's not the case. And it's like, wow. God of Speed is like, dude, I'm super excited to find out what that's all about. But that's not the only thing this episode was about. The episode was also about Caitlin coming out about like, yo, so I have powers and everything. She brings it up Cisco. And obviously, like, we finally get our explanation as to why she didn't tell anyone. At first, it was because, like, she, deniability is like, as long as you deny it, it doesn't exist. But then eventually, like, I've pieced it together before, it's like, she didn't want to become Killer Frost. That's the downside of having visited Earth 2. If she had never seen that alternate version of herself, she wouldn't be terrified of it. She would have been like, oh, cool. I guess I'm a meta now. That's kind of cool. But it's because she sees what the powers did to Killer Frost. I mean, granted, that was an alternate version of herself. I mean, who's to say your powers are what you make them? I mean, granted, comic book wise, she is like a straight up villain. So I'm very curious because I was always wondering, like, what were they going to do with her? I mean, obviously, because the whole thing was kind of like, okay, so we kind of got Killer Frost with Earth 2 Caitlin, so we would never have it happen with Earth 1 Caitlin. But then I was starting thinking maybe Zoom did something to her to make her like that, but now Flashpoint kind of turned her into that. I mean, who's to say Caitlin would have never actually turned into Killer Frost eventually down the road? I mean, these powers only popped up like 2 months ago for her, so who's to say maybe they're just not a little more trailed down the road, and like Caitlyn in the original timeline would have became like that anyway. But the fact is, she has Cisco. Is like, okay, Cisco vibe me. He vibes her, and then she sees her as Killer Frost versus him, using her powers and fighting each other. It's like, oh man, like he's super worried about it. And at first, Caitlyn's like, don't tell anybody, but Cisco is like, nah, he outs her. He's like, yo, I'm telling everybody. She's like, it wasn't your secret to tell. But for him, it's kind of like, keeping secrets never works for us. It just makes things worse later on down the road. And for her, she talks about the fact is that she was scared because she didn't know how to react. Slight interesting thing. I kept wondering why I recognized the actress who plays her mom. It's I'm pretty sure the actress's name is Susan Walters. Obviously, I've seen her in stuff from time to time. I could be wrong, but didn't she play Tyler's mom, Mayor Lockwood from The Vampire Diaries? But also, just because it premiered this today, which I'm going to be talking about later tonight. I mean, well, later today, because when you hear these and everything. But she also plays Lydia's mom from Teen Wolf, and that's where I was like, right. I was like, I kept wondering why I knew her from. I mean, obviously I've seen her in other stuff too, but it was just like that was probably what that was really sinking in my head about that, and probably the Vampire Diaries thing too. But nevertheless. But the fact of the matter is, because it brought up an interesting thing too. It's like, she's asking Cisco, it's like, okay, have you ever lied about anything that hasn't come true? And he's like, well, the whole Earth 2 splitting thing, that never happened. But, you know, he's like, I mean, that could be anything. I was like, maybe we can change the future, or maybe the whole Earth 2 splitting thing is true, but it just hasn't happened yet. So because also that whole thing could have been, there's so many possibilities of what that could have been. Like, you get a very short burst look at something, you know, in Cisco's case, get a short burst look. So it's like, that could be opened up to interpretation. Maybe she's straight up villainous, or maybe it was something else. Maybe it was you trying to help her, like, maybe she was training, and it's like you're helping her learn how to control her abilities more. Because, you know, it becomes a situation whether it's nurture versus nature, like whether someone it's like if you're a bad guy from the very beginning, obviously your powers are just going, like, you're just going to be a bad guy with powers, like most Flash villains. But you take Barry, for example. Barry got his powers, became a good guy. You look at Cisco, got powers, still a good guy. I mean, it just depends on circumstances. So, I mean, maybe Caitlyn's worried about nothing. I mean, maybe her stressing about this is what eventually turns her. I mean, I guess I could understand her worry about it because, like, her powers being cold and everything. Maybe it turns her heart cold and she becomes emotionally cold and just doesn't like people, doesn't care for people anymore. So maybe, you know, I'm sure your powers can affect you on a psychological level too. So I don't know. It was kind of interesting. And once again, like I said, that whole conversation, it does make me, they set that back up saying like, oh yeah, there's that whole like Earth 2 splitting in half thing. I thought that was just because of Zoom and everything. Maybe that wasn't necessarily connected to Zoom. Maybe that was just something else that Cisco was tapping into back then. So, I mean, they threw that up as a possibility to see where that might go. So, and also an interesting thing I want to note in this episode is the fact is that, when it comes to HR, the fact of the matter is him being the idea guy and everything, he came up with the idea like, hey, you know what we should do? You know, we should kind of change things up because it's like eventually people are going to piece it together. It's like, oh, you work at Starlight. Oh, you work with the Flash and everything. And he's like, okay, let's turn it into a museum. And then turns up the whole conversation of like, yeah, you can't be the face of the, like, you know, Star Labs and everything. He's like, why not? It's like, well, fake Harry, you know, Eobard was disguised as, and he kind of openly admitted to killing Barry's mom, so it's kind of like you can't really be the face of the group and everything. So, but that is kind of an interesting thing because somewhat, once again, tying back to like a source-fed nerd with Superhero Roundups, well, currently Superhero Smackdown, is that they would constantly joke about the fact is like, how do they keep things running? I mean, they're not the only ones. Other people have mentioned that too. It's like, how do they keep things working? And like, do they invent stuff? It's like, how do you keep such a large building? How do you keep the electricity on? Like, this is kind of like your day job thing. So how do you actually get paid? So to me, it's almost like the writers are kind of answering that at this point in time. It's like, oh yeah, you know, we changed some things up. You've always been wondering about people getting in. It's like, oh, people get kidnapped. It's like, oh, we got monitors to kind of track them down because everyone kind of gets kidnapped and everything. So it's like they're answering stuff they might not have answered in the previous seasons. Kind of like, yeah, we have an answer for you. So it's kind of like, it'd be kind of interesting to find out that's what they decided to do with Star Labs, kind of turn it into a museum, make it more profitable, because it's kind of like, how do you keep this up, you know? Keeping everything up, and at the same, like it is something that's never been answered. Like maybe they have a trust fund that, you know, I'm sure, you know, Eobard, you know, disguised as Wells had access to his money, so maybe that was something, but it never came up and everything. But the question is, once he was dealt with, how did that all play out? Did the money get transferred over to someone like Cisco or Caitlyn? I mean, I guess Star Labs is kind of just abandoned. I mean, obviously, certain people just walk into there and everything, but I guess it's a type of situation where it's kind of like, no, everyone looks at it as kind of a rundown building, so no one's really paying attention to the fact that it's like, oh yeah, there's all this, the electric bill for this place is way up there. It's like, why? This building should be shut down. No one's here. So I don't know. It's just kind of a whole funny thing. And something kind of going back to the Caitlyn thing really quickly. Something I thought would be kind of interesting. We know that alchemy has the power to make people into metahumans because of who they were at Flashpoint. Now, what I think would be interesting if Caitlyn does, because someone they had, I'd heard the fact is like, oh, what if Cisco went to Alchemy to try and revive his brother? Because the thing is, Dante Earth 2 wise was a metahuman, so maybe in some shape or form that could be. Man, I mean, I doubt it can be. He is dead and everything, but I mean, it's like if he might have existed as a mid-human in Flashpoint, maybe he could bring him back in that sense, and maybe that's what Cisco would ask Alchemy. But now I'm looking at the situation, it's like maybe Caitlyn comes to him being like, okay, I need you to turn me into the Flashpoint version of me where I didn't have powers. I mean, we don't know that for sure. I mean, but from the little time that we were there, it didn't seem like Caitlyn had power. Because now she knows it's like, oh yeah, like, oh, this me having powers thing is kind of a Flashpoint thing. And Barry was like, yeah. So it makes you wonder would that also cause her to kind of turn against Barry in the future, being like, this is all your fault. You turned me into this monster. I don't know. It'd be kind of interesting if that's where that goes. And side note, I really love the fact is that HR like basically came up with, he has that device that basically his partner created, you know, on Earth 19 that basically is kind of like almost like a hologram almost, but I mean a fully fleshed hologram that covers up his face and he looks like his partner, which to me, I'm like, I mean, he made it so that everyone else sees him as HR, but to other people, like obviously everyone at Star Labs, certain things, he did something to their eyes to make it so that it's like, oh yeah, you see the real me, but for everyone else, they see the face I've created. Which could be a problem because he never bothered to think, oh, what if there's an Earth-worn counterpart to my, you know, partner? So that could raise some questions like, hey, this guy's walking around with my face. I mean, I guess you could always come up with a lie like, oh yeah, I'm your long-lost twin. It's like, okay, then why are you using my name? What? So, I mean, that's the thing. I mean, he's a doppelganger, so obviously his partner's doppelganger's got to exist on Earth. I'm sure that's going to be a storyline that kind of pops up. So, but I really love the fact is that when Joe was on his date with Cecile, which we ended up finding out she has a child, an 18-year-old daughter, but he came in, started having the whole conversation, and just kind of railroad Joe's date and everything. So that was kind of interesting. I was like, wow, she's like really, I mean, obviously it didn't change the fact is that she likes Joe. At least I don't think. It'd be once again kind of interesting if we see what comes of that. But I'm just, like I said, I'm super psyched to see where everything goes. Like this God of Speed, Alchemy. Is it Julian? Is it not? Because I was really halfway expecting him to take his mask off and everything. But it's like, But once again, he brings up the fact is you don't know what's coming. And once again, they brought up the whole Earth 2 thing splitting, so maybe they'll play a part in this and everything. So I guess we'll just have to see. I hope Wally doesn't come out being a bad guy. I mean, once again, it's kind of like the same thing with Caitlyn. It's like nature versus nurture type of thing. Will it be? Because like I said, I don't think Barry, I mean, maybe we'll eventually get to the point where Barry will kind of be like, oh, I guess I'm not needed because Kid Flash is here kind of saving the day. You know, maybe we'll kind of see a little bit of that jealousy side. Because I feel like that's probably where a lot of what Wally feels, you know, comes from. It's like he thinks Barry's jealous of him, but like I brought up before, you know, he's just concerned, he's worried about him. But maybe there is a side of him that is jealous. I mean, during the whole Flashpoint thing, he wasn't too concerned about it. He's like, oh yeah, you go off and do your thing. But then it was like, I mean, he was kind of happy to find out like Wally was a speedster and everything. And probably just kind of like that's kind of sweet line is when, like I brought it up earlier, Iris was talking about the fact is that it's just like, because Barry is like, I wouldn't be the Flash. There wouldn't be a Flash without you. And she's like, yeah, you would be fine with it. He's like, no, there is no Flash without Iris West. I'm like, that's so cute. It's so adorable and so true because it's like, you know, just kind of nodding to the fact is that Iris West plays a big part in, you know, crossing the streams a little bit. It'd be like, there's no Superman without Lois Lane. There's no, well, that wasn't crossing the streams, but more so crossing the streams. Would be like, there's no Spider-Man without Mary Jane. I mean, that's kind of horse crap because it's like, I mean, there's also Spider-Man with Gwen Stacy. So terrible example, but you get my point. Just super excited to see where everything goes. But really, that's all I wanted to talk about in this episode. To the next time we meet, be happy. Oh, like, let me stop myself right there. Holy crap. Literally almost forgot the villain of the episode, Shade, because he wasn't that big of a villain. I guess he was meant to be a distraction and everything. I was kind of expecting him to be a much bigger thing, but it's like, no, he popped up like twice in the episode and he's immediately dealt with. Apparently his body moves so fast that he's able to create he makes himself look like a shadow, and he comes up from the shadows and everything. So that's I'm pretty cool. But like I said, it was just immediately thwarted, kind of taken down. So I mean, that's kind of like the last note. I almost completely forgot about that. So I mean, I'm wondering. Obviously, we'll probably be seeing him in the near future and everything. Is he like a Earth One metahuman, or is he a Flashpoint metahuman? I mean, they do throw out the possibility as like, oh, he was a distraction and everything. So maybe a Flashpoint meta. I don't know. I guess we'll just have to see. But like I said, it was just kind of over with. But I guess it's because like he wasn't the main point on the episode. I mean, he did one killer thing when he first appears. I mean, literally pops out to do shadow and snaps his neck. So I was like, ooh. But I don't think he actually hurt anybody else in the rest of the episode, which is a good thing and whatnot. But still, it's just I don't know, just kind of interesting. I can't believe I let that slip my mind. I mean, it was not that big of a part of the episode, so. The main focus of it was Wally and the whole alchemy thing, so. But now, truly, that is all I wanted to talk about. Till the next time we meet, be happy, be safe, live life to the fullest, and enjoy it. Good day and goodbye.